Well, everyone, welcome today to our virtual expert chat on active STEM learning. We are so excited for today's virtual panel because we have some incredible panelists. I wanted to kick it off. I'm Emma with the Teachers Guild, and just to share a little bit more about this project and then ways that you can jump in during our virtual panel. So we are running a 10-week design challenge, asking you educators to design active STEM to your classrooms. We're right now in our insights phase where you can share stories of active STEM learning in your classroom. You can ask students questions about their feelings and sentiments about STEM, and in 1 week we'll open up our ideate phase where you can share and post new ideas. So the hope with this panel is that this gets your thinking started, you're thinking about opportunities, you're thinking about gaps, you're thinking about ways that you might bring some of the insights shared on today's panel into your classroom. Moderating today's panel is Grace Doramas, Chief of Staff at 100K in 10, whose mission it is to bring 100,000 new STEM teachers in 10 years by 2020. An incredible organization doing great work in the field of STEM, and she will introduce our panelists. And again, if you'd like to contribute any questions, please do so on Twitter using the hashtag mindblowingSTEM and at Teachers Guild. You can also jump in our chat box if you're on the video portion, and that is just below. You can type in some questions in that chat box and we'll be collecting them from there. So without further ado, I will pass it to Grace.
Thank you so much, Emma, and thank you everybody for joining us. We're really excited for this opportunity and so thankful to our panelists for taking the time this afternoon or evening, depending upon where you are, to join us. So as Emma mentioned, 100K in 10 is a national network of about 280 partner organizations committed to training and retaining 100,000 excellent STEM teachers over a 10-year period. So we began about 5 years ago in response to President Obama's call for 100,000 STEM teachers in a decade. And so we're working toward our end goal of 2021. And we're actually on track with our partners to reach that goal. And now with our 280 partners, we are thinking about how do we move beyond this 100,000 teacher goal? How do we ensure that we aren't just putting new teachers in the classroom or serving those who are already in the classroom, but how are we looking at some of the bigger systemic issues that made this need in the first place? And how are we as a network hub and as 280 really great organizations and as a complete field thinking about STEM teaching and learning, how are we really beginning to shift around some of those big systemic challenges that have made this need so critical? And so as we think about that, we have done some work around mapping what those big challenges are, what those big systemic issues are. And two of the big things we're thinking about are both how we make sure that kids are learning STEM in authentic and engaging ways. In other words, how are they taking part in the classroom in active STEM learning? And we're also thinking about, across all of the challenges that we've identified, how do we engage our teachers and make sure that our teachers are an active participant in designing some of the solutions to those challenges? And so in thinking about these two things, it was a no-brainer to take on this collaboration with the Teachers Guild. We're so thrilled to be a part of it, and we're really excited to see the solutions that many of y'all will develop over the course of this fall. We're especially excited to think about how we might work with some of our partners to implement those solutions in the classroom and see them come to life. So that is where 100K in 10 is coming from on this really cool journey that we're taking here with IDEO and with several other partners and many of you. And I really am excited tonight, or this afternoon, depending upon where you are, to hear from some of our wonderful panelists about their insights around this really important issue. So we have 4 wonderful folks joining us today. The first is Jennifer Parker. She is the Springwoods High School principal and has been a secondary building principal for the past 12 years. During those 12 years, she's worked in urban areas with high levels of mobility, second language learners, and more than 55% of the communities that she's worked with are economically disadvantaged. Jennifer is passionate about urban education achievement. She's passionate about providing rigorous learning opportunities for students. And she is extremely passionate also about connecting those students to future pathways. We also have Dr. Randy Swear with us today. He heads up the Autodesk Education Experiences team and is responsible for the company's the Future of Learning business transformation. Randy has expertise in both design and education, and prior to Autodesk, he was the provost at the University of Philadelphia. He also served as the deputy director of the design program at the National Endowment for the Arts and was the design division head in the College of Fine Arts at the University of Texas. There, he was awarded the Texas Excellence Teaching Prize. He received his PhD in anthropology and urban studies from Union Institute, an MFA in design from Yale University, and a BA from Wesleyan University. Our third panelist is Sonia Pryor-Jones. She's the Chief Implementation Officer for the nonprofit FAB Foundation. And she has been chosen as one of the 10 White House champions of change for making. She's also served as the Executive Director for the Metropolitan Cleveland Consortium for STEM, the regional hub for the Ohio STEM Learning Network in Cleveland, Ohio. And our final panelist is Melissa Moretz, who is the Deputy Director of STEM at the U.S. Department of Education. In this capacity, she supports STEM policy and programs at ED that focus on STEM teaching and learning for preschool to workforce. Prior to joining ED, Melissa was the Vice President of STEM and Education Initiatives at Teach for America. And she was named one of the 100 women leaders in STEM in 2012 and previously sat on STEM Connectors Innovation Task Force and the U.S. News STEM Advisory Council. She is a graduate of MIT. So as you can see, we have 4 really amazing folks joining us today who actually are thinking about STEM learning and STEM teaching and how we engage our students in active STEM from a variety of different viewpoints. So we're excited to hear their thoughts on each of those. And what I'm going to do now is pose some questions and point it to some particular panelists in each of these. And I hope that, as Emma mentioned at the beginning, those of you who are listening in will actively participate and throw your questions into the mix, and we will be able to get to those at the end. So first, a question to you, Melissa, and to you, Sonia. We've heard a lot about the term active STEM as we geared up for this collaboration. What exactly is active STEM and what makes it active? Melissa, if you want to start us off, that would be great.
Sure, it's a great question. So I think, in terms of what is it? It's really, how do we make sure that kids are actively doing, and I shouldn't use active to actually define it, but how kids are doing STEM and experiencing STEM by doing, as opposed to just hearing about it. Or I think people have probably all been in courses and classes. I can speak from my own experience where I was learning about mathematics by just practicing problems, as opposed to really sort of seeing math in nature or having the opportunity to see how things are applied and how they're done, or being able to explore design experiments myself, as opposed to just carrying out a set of written steps and instructions. So I think that active really implies the doing. We are, instead of teaching STEM by having sort of STEM done to kids, we are letting them do it and experiment with it and see what it looks like and feels like, and explore their own questions and challenges while learning about a lot of natural phenomenon and how the world works. So I think the active for me is the big piece. And oftentimes when I'm thinking about what active STEM is, I defer to sort of thinking about what it was not in my own educational experience.
That's really great. Thank you, Melissa. And Sonia, we'd love to hear your thoughts added on to those, please.
What I add to that, and I definitely agree with what Melissa has stated, is that active STEM is really, in my mind, the spinoff of active learning. And so when we think about young people or even adults, as we learn, we all have different learning styles and different ways that we engage with the world. And so in my mind's view, active STEM is really, how do we actively engage people in science, technology, engineering, and math in a way that's meaningful to them, in a way that they can make sense with content and also look for relevant relevant ways to apply that content to their world. And in that world, that might be a second grader who just still needs to learn their multiplication facts, or it could be an older adult who is retooling for the modern age workforce. But it's done in a way that's very personalized and that really gets to the need of the individual learner.
I love that. Thank you for sharing that. And I love how you, really mentioned the adult learning in there too, as active learning is something that stretches across all ages and is important to begin with our earliest learners and continue with folks of all ages and make that meaningful and relevant. It's really, it's exciting to hear more of y'all's thoughts on that. Thank you. Randy and Jennifer, a question for you two. Why is STEM learning so important right now? We know it's in the educational zeitgeist, and why is that? As the leader of a software company and a leader of a school, why is giving kids access to active STEM learning opportunities important to you and your work?
Okay, so I'm happy to, I mean, look, this is sort of the key question to everything. So, you know, we're making this big transition, right, from the industrial era into the sort of post-industrial innovation-driven society. And in the industrial era, we had these like separate disciplines that were like divisions on an assembly line. We're moving past that now. In order to really drive innovation, you've got to put these disciplines into dynamic relationships with one another in new ways. So when I think about STEM, I'm talking about the dynamic, integrative force of disciplines intermingling together in new ways. And that's really what we need right now in order both to drive the economy, but forget the economy for a second, to help solve the huge social, cultural problems that the world faces today, including like climate change. So it's about bringing disciplines into active, integrative, productive, creative relationships with one another to drive that active learning. I love those definitions of active learning.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm going to jump in. I would agree wholeheartedly with what Dr. Swearer said. The big piece in schools, in public schools, charter schools, private schools, schools in general, is that number one, active engagement is what captivates kids, keeps them in school, and it also provides opportunities so that they can all reach highest level of learning possible. And I believe that's important that we, number one, increase those opportunities for kids so that they're engaged and they're learning about their opportunities for the future, because it's ever changing. And it's something that we need to make certain we are preparing our kids for today so that they can have that future tomorrow when they set their goals, paths, and dreams as they move forward. And that all, many kids are so drawn to science and STEM. And when you provide these opportunities for students in these courses and this coursework, it's something, and it's engaging, and you're doing it, learning by doing and doing it with the students.
They light up.
Yeah. Exactly. There's a light.
Yeah.
I love that. That's so great the way you both describe that, and I'm particularly thrilled by the way that both of you come to that question from two really different perspectives, but both agree so much and really can add so much nuance to that. And so a follow-up question on that relates to what both of you were saying, that I'm wondering, Randy and Melissa, if maybe y'all might take a stab at, is what do you see as the most important skill sets in the workplace of the future? And how, how does that map back to active STEM learning? So it's very much building on the points y'all were just making, but curious, about what you think as two folks, Melissa and Randy, from a really high level looking at this issue.
Yeah.
What are some of those skill sets in the workplace?
Would you like to go? I'm happy.
You go first.
Okay, yeah. Well, it's so, look, I talk about the integrative learning and all that, and I think it's tremendously important, and I'm not disregarding at all the importance of depth here too, because the disciplinary depth is critical, but I really am going to come back again and again to this issue of integration, integrative, dynamic forms of learning, and I think it's really giving students the ability to understand the methods of inquiry for each of these different disciplines, and then how they fit together, right? And how you can put them in dynamic relationship with one another, because that allows students to grow and progress over the arc of a career in life, not just their first job or getting into college and focusing narrowly down on one specialization. But over and atop all that, I gotta tell you, the thing that Okay, so STEM is really important to everybody, but the soft skills too, you know, collaboration, teamwork, which I think is part of STEM. It has to be there too. So when we talk about active learning, the kind of active learning that builds the ability to work in teams, the ability to listen to other people, the ability to collaborate, the ability to, you know, all those sort of soft skills. When I'm hiring people, that's what I'm looking for.
Yeah, I agree completely. I think that that's one of the things I was going to say was collaboration, working across lines of difference, the ability to sort of recognize that someone might have a different perspective than you or a different way to solve that problem, but it doesn't make it wrong. It makes it different and interesting as a result, I think is huge. I think the ability to combine, as you said, lots of different information from lots of different domains. And I would say that within the STEM disciplines, but also outside, drawing inspiration from different places and thinking about sort of moving towards the innovation piece, we need to be able to take lots of different pieces of information and create new things. So the ability to be able to solve complex problems, I couldn't agree with you more in terms of collaboration and working with diverse teams. And then I also think that there's a handful of skills that I would say are around, being able to go deep, but also like a genuine love of learning. Like I agree with you, Randy. Like
curiosity.
I would hire, like if someone is like totally excited to learn something and to figure it out and has a track record of being able to do that, I find that maybe more important than, okay, great, you know these 17 programming languages or these, you know, you have these particular certifications. Like, I just think, you know, you're going to be able to figure that out. And what I love about active STEM learning is that you are putting kids in situations where they are able to draw on their own unique experiences. They bring their own perspectives to the table, and they're coming up with these really creative, exciting ways using the information that they have at their disposal. And as opposed to sort of being passive consumers and being able to regurgitate facts, like being able to use that is super important. And it develops a love of learning. It allows kids to sort of see school's super relevant for me. This topic is super relevant for me. I'm good at it. I'm in, you know, there's lots of that I can contribute because of my own unique perspective and my thoughts in this realm. So
it's about passion, right?
Right. I want to jump in really quick at something to say in regards to supporting for teachers. So I think it's really important. It's when we provide the opportunities for kids and we integrate and we look at all the different coursework that we offer, but it's also important that we grow our teachers and we train our teachers so that they have those opportunities to bring that back to the classroom as leaders in STEM and support them through that message that, you know, this is the direction that we're going to focus on.
Grace, if I could jump in and just sort of underscore some of what I'm hearing, I think, you know, sort of the big picture, high level view of what we're hearing here, it really is about two buckets, core skills and content. And I think that's the reality for both teachers and students, anyone who's moving through the workforce pathway. I mean, all of those things that we were told in the olden days that were soft skills are really core skills that allow people to navigate from job to job and situation to situation. And then I think the content piece is really important. There is a dire need in the United States for more people to feel confident, comfortable, and have strong knowledge in the areas of math and science. And so I think we, you know, want to definitely wrap all of that up in core skills, but it really is about both core skills and content.
And it's a cycle, I think, Jennifer, to your point around educators, right? If, you know, thinking about my own experiences, I had to unlearn quite a lot when I was in a teacher education program about the best ways to teach 7th grade science, because I hadn't necessarily, you know, I was fortunate in terms of where I went to college that I was able to experience like authentic science, you know, that I got to apply my own knowledge and do all the things we were just talking about. But it's a tall charge for educators, given all the things that are on their plate, to ensure that they are both having time and experiences that for them are active STEM learning. Most professional development is still like sit and get, you know, it's not taught in sort of an active STEM way that we would want then to be having our teachers teach our students. So we have to really think about that full cycle.
I love all of this, and I think y'all are hitting on some really important points. Sonia and Jennifer, as folks who are really close, or, you know, in many cases close to students and close to teachers on a day-to-day basis, how are you seeing, how are you bringing some of this to life for some of your kids and some of your teachers? How are you supporting them to be able to have access to these kinds of learning opportunities? Both because, as Melissa was saying, so many times as teachers, I mean, as a former teacher as well, I had to unlearn things to learn to be able to teach in a new way. How are you helping teachers gain some of those new skills, and how are you setting up environments that allow kids to learn in these ways?
Yeah, well, with us at the Fab Foundation, we're really doing that through our digital fabrication laboratories. And so Fab Labs, what's also known in a more global environment as a makerspace, are very specific tools and capabilities that we're now bringing into the classroom to both teachers and students. And we're not just bringing it and dropping it like old technology and say, figure this all out, but we're really doing it in partnership. In partnership with corporate partners like a Chevron, who are providing resources to help fund not only for labs to show up in school spaces, development and overall advising that they need. And so we're really starting to see a significant shift even in our work and our own thinking because of the partnering that we're doing with classroom teachers all across the country, as well as students. You know, it warms my heart to see a shift in how students and teachers think about active learning and active STEM, because we're now about a decade in to having these kinds of spaces in schools.
Right. I would say for me, a lot of that is in regards to space and what kind of space do you have available, support, how are you supporting your teachers through professional development, sometimes personalized professional development. And when I've found that when you support teachers and educators, then they come to you with great ideas. And so I've been fortunate to work with some wonderful teachers where they came to me and they said, we'd like to have a STEM conference. And so they put on a STEM conference 2 years in a row for students. They brought in astronauts, all learning by doing, supporting the whole shift of, you know, STEM is learning by doing and active engagement and how you can cross the curriculum with STEM. And so I think that's a big piece. And to your point about, you know, making certain that the professional development is appropriate, engaging, learning by doing, and then as a lead learner, you take that back to your classroom, and it tends to grow through your delivery, if you will.
And teachers are craving that. They're so hungry for it. Everywhere I go, that is one of the biggest questions that people sort of, you know, the conversation around professional development, and in particular, exactly what you both were just talking about. So exciting to hear what you're doing.
Yeah, I love that. And I hope that, Jennifer, I hope that some of those great teachers that you work with are on right now or planning to join us on the collaboration, and excited to see some of the ideas that they bring, and that those of you who are participating right now and who will participate in the collaboration throughout the fall will bring too, to try to bring these active STEM learning opportunities into schools. So that's really great. Thank you. I want to turn to do a quick whip around with all four panelists right now to share one or two things. If you are so torn, maybe three, about some of the coolest things that are happening in STEM education right now and why. Like, what are some of the coolest active STEM learning things that you're seeing happening? And tell us a little bit about it.
I can start. For me, at the high school level, I've been both a high school principal as well as a middle school principal. And some of the coolest things that are going on, things like my example previous that I stated, the STEM conference, where multiple teachers get together, they plan a conference, kids get to choose what they'd like to learn, interact with professionals, find out what, you know, that might be like if they were interested to be an engineer or a doctor, an astronaut. What does it take to follow that path, and what kind of courses might you want to learn about, investigate, and be involved in? In addition to that, a lot of the courses that are being offered at the public school currently are just the things that the learning by doing, going out and exploring, what does it look like in the community? Yep. How can you engage with the university? How do you engage with the energy corridor that We have in the Houston area where kids have the opportunity to tour plants and to interact with the people who are doing the work, and what does that mean? Because I think sometimes there's some misconceptions until the kids actually get to go in and to shadow and see what does it look like when it's actually in place. And some of the other, I would say one other thing is that some of the opportunities are not even yet created. So I think there needs to be time with makerspace in different areas so that kids begin to invent and create, because some things are not even yet in place professionally or in opportunities for kids. And so I think that that time needs to be built in as well.
So if I could jump in real quick here. Look, there's so much going on right now in STEM, but there are a few things that really, really drive my passion. And one of them is the kind of active STEM learning or STEAM learning that integrates or really drives empathy with the students. Okay, we have, there's a very cool high school in Cambridge, Massachusetts, Newview, NUVU, and one of the students there developed a wheelchair, right? And
oh, wow.
It was for a student who had a high-end wheelchair, but there were things about it that they didn't like. And so they redesigned the wheelchair for the student with a lever, right? Instead of, it's awkward mechanically actually to use your arms to move the wheels in a wheelchair. That to me, that gives me goosebumps. And the same school, did an amazing project for people with disabilities, a seat that lifts up. 13-year-old, made this amazing invention after doing user research down in Mexico. So I just, I love the kinds of projects that are active STEM learning that are at the same time, driving deep empathy. And just real quick, another thing that I think is really exciting, I loved what I heard about the focus on teachers and teacher development, because I think, we often, as we create these maker spaces, and of course at Autodesk, we love making things. But all these maker spaces, and sometimes I worry that there's not enough professional development to really integrate them deeply into the classroom, into the curriculum, which, as you all know, we all know, is sort of everything. So when I begin to look at STEM experiments with like game-based learning, like Quest to Learn in New York, where they're integrating active STEM-based learning into like game theory and game design, and beginning to think about new ways of learning along with the active STEM, that my goosebumps get even bigger.
I love it. Those are amazing examples, and really touching and showing just how meaningful active STEM learning can actually become. So those are great examples. Thank you. Melissa or Sonia, any thoughts from you on the coolest things you're seeing out there right now?
Go ahead, Sonia, if you want.
Oh, okay, sure. Well, just building off of one of Randy's comments in terms of thinking about the word active in a different way, one of the things that I think is really amazing that's happening in a lot of our Fab Lab spaces is you have communities of people coming together and learning and sharing as a cohort.
Yes.
And they really are iterating the work, so they're iterating the way we even think about how things are placed in a lab. They're iterating the way we think about, besides providing them with professional development, what other kinds of infrastructure change might need to take place in their school district for them to be more effective and really maximize the Fab Lab as a learning space. I think also communities are really active from the perspective of meeting their own community need. Something really important that was stated earlier was around the whole notion of really being able to, in a very intelligent and thoughtful way, deal with some of our largest social issues that we face. Climate change, I think, was the example. So how do we also, right now I see us creating spaces where people can talk about the big questions together and be okay without having immediate answers, but iterating towards those answers as community. I mentioned earlier on that I was actually in Pittsburgh today, and I'm going to have the pleasure of seeing a number of Fab Labs and maker spaces that are in this community, and super excited about one of the high schools, Elizabeth Ford, where they've met a community need in an active way, and they've designed an all-girls engineering and design course because they really saw a need in their public high school community where girls weren't getting what they needed, but if they put them in a gender cohort together, they could advance them on in STEM. And so that was sort of a long answer, but I think, you know, there's so much that's robust that's happening in these spaces when we provide support and advisory. That is a tremendous amount of moving the needle that we see. One other thing I'll mention, I think in a larger way that we're thinking about education in our country right now, I see us inching towards it becoming far more personalized.
Yes.
And really using not just STEM as a platform for rethinking what we teach, but STEM as a platform for changing how we teach and how people are able to engage in their own learning at a personal level. And, you know, we're tinkering with this in not just schools, but also public library spaces and higher education. And so I'm really excited about the future in that.
And gosh, I agree with everybody. It is so hard to pick. There's so many great things that are happening all over the country. And I feel very privileged to have the opportunity to go to different schools and see lots of great things in action. I would say the two categories of things that get me the most excited are truly student-led and driven initiatives, and also teacher-led and driven initiatives. So we've seen across the country with STEM educators really getting together and saying, hey, we want to teach differently, we want to do things differently, we want to offer different opportunities for our students. I need this and I need that. And so places where we're really seeing educators feel very empowered about their own support, their own development. And I think it puts them, I think it's exciting. I think it's engaging when you feel that, and when you are back to our conversation around sort of being curious, and it sort of reminds you about what's so cool and interesting about this, you know, how kids learn and how you learn and all these great things. And there's no shortage of great opportunities that are out there. So I love that I'm seeing a lot of educators who are saying, hey, I really need to figure this out. I really need to figure out what networks are out there, and really figure out how to tackle those resources. We've seen, you know, educators start their own schools. We've seen educators who are teaming together from across the country or around the world to provide more opportunities for their students. There's no shortage of great things that are happening there. And on the student-driven side, I think really thinking about, in response to the sort of question, the thought around how to solve real challenges that you might see in your community or that are driven by your own needs or interests. It does personalize the learning a lot. Even if you're utilizing some of the same problem-solving skills or creative thinking skills, you know, you are able to really tailor it to your own perspective and your own experience. And this whole concept of, I've seen it most in computer science, this concept of computing for good, but I think it applies across all the STEM disciplines of how we utilize STEM to solve some of these problems that we might see, or look at them as challenges and opportunities that we can, you know, have something to say about. And I think it's really empowering for kids, and really puts them in the driver's seat of their own learning, and really shows them that they have a ton to contribute, you know, starting with our youngest learners all the way on up.
I love all of these examples, and I love the focus on that final point of empowering everybody across age groups and across settings to really drive their own learning. I love how many of you were thinking about the whole community's involvement in this kind of learning. I think that's so important, and I think that the four of you represent that. And I also love the thinking about how important it is to engage our students in these issues because of some of these big challenges we are facing as a country and as a world. And I think that, you know, as many of you have mentioned, making those issues, making learning relevant and meaningful for our kids is really so important. So thank you for sharing those. They're really inspiring. And not to turn to something that's a little less inspiring, but I think it's an important question to ask is about challenges. And Sonia and Jennifer, I'd love to hear from y'all first on this one about some of the challenges that you notice for teachers looking to provide their students with really high quality active STEM learning opportunities. And then what are some of the challenges you notice more broadly across schools or districts, depending upon where your perception more lies. I think you both probably have thoughts on both of those two levels. But you know, we've spoken a little bit to some of the challenges around this, but thinking about as we do support our teachers and our principals in schools to do active STEM learning, what are some of the challenges that we're seeing?
Go ahead, Sonia.
Oh, I think I start with there's just not enough time in the day. You know, from the perspective of everything that teachers, whether you're in a STEM content area or not, are faced with in this country. Particularly when we talk about improving education in our highest need communities. You know, many times teachers are faced with not just being the content expert in the classroom, but also a number of community wraparound and social issues as well. So I think, you know, that's one thing that continues to be a challenge for teachers in classrooms and schools. I think also the reality of many of our teachers are joining a profession that is constantly changing, where the expectations from the general public is changing, and what it is that they have to accomplish based on mandates in terms of state standards, etc. And so I don't think our teaching institutions, our teachers' colleges and programs have really had an opportunity to retool what they teach and how they prepare teachers for the modern day classroom. Mm-hmm. And so that's also a challenge for teachers as they enter the profession. So that's sort of a more systematic challenge that they're faced with. And then I think on the ground, many of our teachers in some cases may not have the content expertise. You know, they themselves maybe didn't get enough math, get enough science, have enough exposure to technology or engineering principles and practices. So sometimes that puts them in a disservice as well. The other thing I say is that many of the ways that we see progress happening in classroom and with students in active STEM learning in spaces like Fab Labs require a very different set of rules and thinking about how you use space and time in a given school day. And that's also a big challenge for a lot of our individual schools or school districts to even rethink scheduling, to rethink how teachers prep and prepare together. So those are some of the challenges that come to mind.
Yeah.
Very similar to what Sonia said. I agree with her points. And for me, it's 3 different areas: time, resources, and people. All 3 of them are limited. Time in the classroom, time for active learning and engagement, especially when you begin to really delve into some of the STEM concepts and content that requires more time than maybe perhaps that a teacher has. Resources have a tendency sometimes to be limited. I know that there are lots of avenues in which you can acquire resources, but it doesn't necessarily always reach to all levels in all schools. And so those are limited, and it's a challenge to think differently on how you can still bring forward a lot of this content actively with kids, with both limited time, resources, and then people. And there are 2 things that I think about people. Number one, it's having good quality professional development to work with your people so that they're learning by doing, and it's personalized, and it's not a sit and get, and it's engaging, that they can bring back to the kids and then model it to the kids. And I would say in addition to that, there's a scarcity of people that are available that are going into the profession, and that's something that sometimes we're our own worst enemy, where we don't necessarily always advocate for going into the profession and staying. And so what does that look like in the future, and where are we in recruiting and retaining high quality individuals so that we can support our goals for STEM education and education in general?
Yeah, I think those are both of you make really great points. And I think one thing that we're really excited about is how through this really cool opportunity that IDEO is putting on, I think that we're excited to see how our teachers can be innovative and design solutions around some of those challenges. And, you know, as many of you have mentioned today, we see that happening in many classrooms in many schools already. And so I'm excited to see that despite these challenges, and although it can be, I think, depressing or disheartening to really go down the path of thinking about them, that there are still really great ways that we can innovate around them. And I'm excited to see what some of you who are participating now and who will be on the platform in the coming months will come up with to help us overcome some of these challenges. And I know that many of you participants have been throwing questions to us. I want to ask our panelists one more question before we turn to y'all, and this goes to all 4 of you. What are your hopes for the future of STEM in classrooms, and how do you think and hope that this might manifest even beyond classrooms? And so what are the wishes you have for the teachers as they embark on this design journey?
I have a lot of wishes, but I also believe that the only way we're going to solve lots of these challenges in education is by empowering our educators. So I'm grateful for this challenge and the opportunities for educators to be able to share their, no doubt, completely brilliant ideas about how to make this happen. But I think the big thing that I would just say is that my hope is that some of the solutions and some of the proposals that people put together are ones that could be sort of easily scaled, thinking about precisely what Jennifer mentioned, the limitations around people, resources, and time. So I think places where we can more effectively see how this can be integrated into the school day, but also seamlessly integrated with what students are experiencing in out of school opportunities. So that, because kids don't really experience, like, it's just their life. It's not like you now have math class and now you have, like, it's just, you know, and now you go home, like, it's just their life. And so we need to figure out better ways to make sure that those things are connected. I also think so I'm excited to see what opportunities, you know, people come up with that sort of effectively integrate and really take some of those constraints into mind, so that some of these opportunities could be sort of effectively scaled or shared. And lastly, I'll say that I'm really excited about the network that you all are creating with each other, and to be able, because I think that's huge in terms of being able to have a constant place to share ideas and to sort of workshop things with other people, even if they're not in your same school. I think that can be really huge and really powerful. So I guess my other charge and challenge to everybody would be to make sure that you keep the community going and that you're constantly sharing beyond this challenge with others, you know, and bringing other people into the community who seem interested. I think we'll see a lot more, I think we'll see it reach more people that way.
I mean, I would say, you know, just to pick up on that, I would say to the teachers out there, look, we have the most respect for you. We know you're the ones hacking the system. You're in there making it work. You're in there innovating. You're making it real for the students. You're doing the active learning. You're rethinking STEM education. The system will catch up with you, but it's going to take a while. And so my dream is that there's alignment between the remarkable energy and innovation that's going on inside the secondary classroom and the broader system. And I see that beginning to happen. If I could just make a quick statement that, you know, I spent so much of my life in higher education, and in colleges and universities, I always look back at secondary schools and like, oh, we'll teach them how to do things. Well, that's inverted now, right? When you're talking about teaching and innovation in the classroom, it's secondary and primary. They're the ones, that's where it's happening, and it's trickling up. So I want more alignment, but keep doing it, man. You're doing great.
I love it. Those are really inspiring thoughts from y'all. Jennifer and Sonia, what about you?
For me, the hope is, my greatest hope is that we're starting. This is the great start. And I believe that, you know, the whole idea of the design thinking, starting with empathy, reaching out and looking to address the problem versus ignoring what some of the challenges are, addressing them head on and moving forward with solutions in regards to STEM education and providing greater opportunities for all students. And so this is, I give it to everyone who's involved in this. And I thank you for your time. And I know that you have to start somewhere, and you're starting now, and that is paramount to accomplishing your goals. And I'm all for you and all with you.
Yeah, and I just, you know, add that I'd like to see us continue to create more platforms for these teacher leaders to find their tribe. You know, there are other great teachers out there all around the country, all around the world, that are, you know, staying up at night thinking about the same things you're thinking about, trying to figure out how to better connect with their students and make the learning real and active and exciting. Mm-hmm. And so I'm just hopeful that organizations like 100 Can 10, the Teachers Guild, everyone here will continue to create those platforms where teachers can connect and grow and learn together. I think also figuring out in this next rendition how we equipped our students to be far more active in their own learning and really the decision makers in what they learn and how they learn, and really getting them to a point where they can do that effectively. I'm the mom of a teenage son, and I'm constantly thinking about that and struggling with that even as a parent. And so I think students themselves and their families also have a role in all of this, and we've really got to figure out how to tap the entire ecosystem.
Y'all, this has been so great. Your thoughts are just really exciting and inspiring and insightful, and I think that you've really given all of us a lot to think about and a lot to mull over as we dive into this really cool collaboration. And I also know that the teachers who are joining us today have just as many amazing insights and thoughts, and want to share some of those with y'all and ask you some questions around those. So I'm going to pass it back over to Emma to facilitate some Q&A. A bunch of questions have been rolling in, so I don't think we'll be able to get to all of them, but thank you so much for putting up with all of my questions and sharing such great thoughts. And Emma, passing it back to you for some Q&A time.
Great, thank you, Grace. I want to reiterate Grace's thanks. First of all, I've been just sort of sitting here quietly like, what? Mind blown. This is incredible. Particularly, all of you have talked about the importance of community and educator-to-educator networks and the power of that to drive really innovative breakthrough ideas, and also just to give you that support that's needed. And this initiative, that's exactly what this is about. So just wanted to underscore that and completely agree. So we have been getting some really great questions from the community listening out there, and educators truly from all over the country have been chiming in. So I want to start right now is having a really large viewing party, so we hope this has been great for you. And Sophia has asked, so how do you recommend we help students understand the skills that they need to enter into the workplace of the future? What are some things that educators can do to bring to their classroom to help young people see that these are not just sort of skills in theory, that these will map to things in the workplace of the future? And I'll just sort of open that up. Anyone who kind of wants to chime in can have at it.
My thought would be show, don't tell. So opportunities for them to actually operate as, a little team of, STEM consultants or gurus or coders or however, whatever it is that you're working on. So I would, actually think about what that looks like, and then potentially have them have the opportunity to go to one of these places to be able to see it in action, or figure out ways that you might be able to Skype with, someone who is in that particular career. I feel like actually experiencing it side by side, so that it's not just sort of a professional sort of talking to kids about what their job is like, but actually like, let's go take a virtual tour if we can't go to some place of, I don't know, pick a company and like, what does it look like? What are their spaces set up look like? How do they work together? And actually then being able to sort of mirror that. So my advice would be show, don't tell. But the other thing I would say is that there are tons, I literally meet STEM professionals from all over the country who would love to be able to do this. So don't be afraid to reach out and ask, like email the local, whoever the industry folks are, email one of us. NASA has a program where you can Skype with an astronaut. There's like tons of opportunities out there to be able to do this. It can be hard to navigate from the educator perspective. I always felt like, where do I go? People say they want to help, but how do I figure that out? So if you're having trouble with that, I would say reach out to us or to your fellow community of educators.
Perfect. Thank you, Melissa. That's great. Great idea. I'd love to, with 10 minutes left, we've got so many questions, so I want to kind of keep running through a couple more. So this one kind of also connects to this idea of real world connections. So we've had kind of two questions around a similar theme. One is from a teacher in Oakland. So she said, when my students think of a scientist, they think of a white guy in a lab coat. How do I help my students understand STEM in a context that matters and feels relevant to them? And similar, we've had a question coming in from Corinna. And she is an urban educator in the Bronx for District 79 and in New York City, and serves a special district reserved for students involved within the juvenile justice system. And she's asking a little bit about this concept of reality pedagogy in STEM, which is essentially this concept of bringing pedagogy into the kind of context, kind of cultural relevant frameworks that that kind of integrate students' realities. And she just sort of is curious to know how to merge those types of thinking with the idea of active STEM, how to bring active STEM learning into a framework, into a context that feels really relevant to their realities.
You know, I was a couple of weeks ago, I can't remember where I read this online somewhere, I'll probably butcher this, but what this question really reminds me of is this comment I read about, you know, really great active learning, teaching is about letting the content live through the student. And in order to do that, you've got to embrace their sort of socioeconomic, the specificities really around that, kind of where they are, what it means to them. And I'm so encouraged to get this question, because I think the issue of integrating diversity, the whole issues of diversity and reality pedagogies into active learning, I think that's it's an art form to do that well, but I think it's everything. It's so important today. We were talking earlier about collaboration and teamwork. It's fundamental. It's fundamental to that, to understanding how different people think and operate in the world in order to get big things done.
Yeah. And I just add to that, if I could, I think, you know, we have to think about this whole notion of relevant and, you know, reality pedagogy as well as diversity issues at a variety of levels. So I think there is just the mentor role model component of this. I think it was mentioned earlier, there are lots of STEM professionals that are willing to get into a classroom. And so I think really tapping into those STEM professionals that also represent different affinity groups is really, really important. You know, so across this country, we've got organizations like SWE that really get at the gender issues in STEM education, as well as organizations like NSBE that get at the racial issues in STEM education. And so I think as much as you can, reaching out to those kinds of affinity groups that also allow students to see themselves as someone who looks like them and is now a scientist or an engineer, and maybe has even traveled a similar socioeconomic path in some cases. So I think there's that mentoring role modeling piece that's important, but I think it's also a harder stretch for us because it gets back to the time and the training for teachers to really figure out, when we're doing creative, thoughtful work with our students around math, around writing, whatever the topic may be, and we're integrating STEM, how do we take projects and develop things that are in and of community? You know, are there certain things that your students are wrestling with because of poverty in their neighborhood, like clean water? You know, so how do you do a water project or a math project or an engineering project based on that social issue that they might be facing? For students that are from different affinity groups or ethnic backgrounds, like Native Americans, what are we doing to think about math and geometry when we think about some of the beautiful, elaborate cultural artifacts that they create? And so really sort of going that extra mile and pushing ourselves to think about how we integrate affinity and culture in the actual classroom curriculum.
That's great. Thank you. And definitely such a really interesting topic to explore, to think about ways of continuing to make this content feel relevant to all learners. And also I think is a really exciting opportunity area for our design challenge coming up. We think about pulling in more diverse role models. We think about applying it to real world problems and questions that matter and start from student perspective. So thank you, educators out there, for asking these questions. We'll have probably time for about 2 more, and just kind of looking across. So there's one interesting question from Gary, who is in Nevada, and he's a co-chair for local CTE programs. Has a couple kind of technical questions about GIS, but I think also asked this kind of interesting question. Have you seen examples of communities engaging students, local students, to solve problems where STEM can be applied? And it just saying, he says, seems like a perfect match to get kids thinking about learning and doing and acting. So any stories that come to mind around sort of community connection and STEM learning?
So to connect both the GIS and the community learning, the EPA actually did this pilot last year, a Visualize Your Water challenge, where they students would use GIS and Esri was one of the partners, where they would use GIS to actually visualize what their water quality looked like in a couple of areas across the country. So they started with that, so that might be an interesting place to look. But I would say there's no shortage of examples where people I see are doing that, whether it's community gardens or whether it's mapping food deserts here in DC. There's lots of different ways to both use mapping technology, but also just engaging students in what they see every day and what they're excited about, and also things that they wish they could change. I feel very fortunate. I taught middle schoolers who are like the most empathetic humans in the world, and I just feel like there was no shortage of the ways that they wanted to change the world. The question was like there wasn't enough time, and there wasn't figuring out how to do that and how to capitalize on that. I think there's lots of different ways to do it. I think you want to be careful with how and do it in a really thoughtful and sensitive way. So making sure to not imply, or make assumptions about what kids may or may not be struggling with, but engaging them in the process, engaging them in the conversations about what they want to be doing and what they see and what they want to be different about the world, I think is a big and important way to start. And I think it's really powerful.
Just another take on that question with CTE and like needs and some examples. And a lot of times there are lots of needs in the medical arena, medical professionals, medical certifications, and CTE has really, the state of Texas kind of taken a step ahead and looking at certification for kids to get out and start getting real-time jobs, and then to help fund either higher ed for them or to continue in a career path. And so those opportunities in working in hospitals and clinics, getting certifications, those are some great examples where you can see in STEM as well as in other areas that CTE has kind of taken a lead in that area for kids.
Great. Really exciting, the sound of that and those projects. I'd love to be able to see some of those. Those sound incredible. Last question that we'll have time for before we need to wrap is kind of coming in from a couple different places, teachers asking in a couple different ways. So one of the themes that you talked about was time. There's been a couple teachers talking a little bit about resources, and a question came in like, do you have to be a really rich district to do active STEM? Do you need all of these things? Like, do you need the laser cutters, and do you need all these manipulatives? And then another kind of question sort of similar to that is this just idea of, when as an elementary school teacher, the issue of like, okay, I'm integrating all the disciplines into my classroom, and there's this active STEM component, and it's really hard, it's really overwhelming. So in a landscape where there's a lot of tools out there, some of which feel kind of out of the reach of certain districts or certain teachers with less resources, and in a sort of elementary context where you're teaching all of the classes, there's a lot of pots to kind of keep boiling and turning. What is some of the advice that you might give to a teacher, an elementary school teacher who is really wanting to do active STEM and hungry to bring this to students, but is sort of overwhelmed by it? What are the hacks? What are the quick wins? What are the ways to just sort of start chipping into this area?
Well, if I could just start real quick. I mean, this isn't an advertisement because it's free, right? But just so everyone knows, because I think it's important, all of Autodesk software for education is free, right? Full version. So you can just download it. There's no cost to the district whatsoever. You just go to our education community and download it. But one of the things I would say is when you get the tools, and there's some tools that are specifically made for younger students like Tinkercad. But when you get the tool, don't get overwhelmed by it. They're pretty simple, but go in and think about the learning outcome that you want and use that part of the tool to get started. And just get started. And if you need to co-create and learn with the students, don't be afraid of that. That's the world we're in today. Dive in and just do it, and just, run.
I would agree with Randy. I would also add that in most communities, you do, particularly for our younger learners, have access to museums and, you know, sort of non-traditional classroom spaces where this kind of learning is very active and alive. I know that's a challenge with field trips, but I think in many of those places you will find an educator or coordinator who's willing to partner with you in how you plan and how you think about your lessons, as well as potentially come into your classroom. So I really encourage teachers to tap their own community resources in that way. And there are just a number of resources now that you can find online.
Yeah.
And so I would encourage people, you know, let Google be your friend, you know, and do some of those searches, because you'll find more and more often people are posting different lesson plans and activities that you can try. I think even right now, Donors Choose has a whole initiative that they've started up to connect you with resources potentially to get your own equipment and tools, as well as to bring people into your classroom.
Jennifer, Melissa, anything to add?
I would say, honestly, I think a lot of inspiration can be drawn from what our earliest educators are already doing. I mean, the opportunity that you have is to integrate. I mean, you already are, you know, you're teaching all of the disciplines. And so there's a ton of opportunity there. And really looking at sort of meaningful play and meaningful experiences that are happening even in 3-year-old and 4-year-old classrooms. I think there's a ton of potential there. I would say in places where you feel nervous about content, ask a middle school teacher or high school teacher. Ask, you know, again, this sort of coming back to this opportunity to build community. I think there's a lot that we can learn at some of the higher grade levels about effective pedagogy and effective integration from our youngest educators. And there's a lot that we can learn content-wise from our elementary educators can learn from middle and secondary. So oftentimes I think we think about community of practice as it's super relevant for me to connect with all the other 7th graders across New York City, 7th grade science teachers across New York City. Actually, it's probably more relevant. That can be relevant, but it could possibly be even better for me to connect with the people so I know where my kids are coming and I know where they're going, and we can actually all work together on how we create active STEM and even mentoring. Then we have mentors as teachers, we have mentors as educators, as for our students. So I think I would just say, like, don't be afraid, dive right in. Tons of people who want to support you in this work, and you're probably already doing a bunch of it.
Yeah. That would probably be my ad, is that just the whole opportunity within your community and what resources do you have in your community, and starting on a tiny scale. And so start tiny, grow it, look at your successes and build on those successes from there. It doesn't have to be an all-out jump in, all or none. If you start tiny and scale it to the needs of your learners, and bring your resources in from your culture that you live in and your community that you live in. And you'd be surprised at how many teachers within your own school, they might have husbands or wives or family members, friends that also have resource within the STEM community that would be an easy, quick win for you.
Great. So did you hear that, educators? You're already doing great things. You've got an incredible community around you, and there is no shortage of amazing resources out there to pick up and try completely for free at your fingertips. And also this incredible design challenge ahead of you. So we've got one more week where you can share insights, share your stories, go out and interview students and ask them what matters to you, and use those insights to drive the next active STEM solution you're going to bring to your classroom. Our Ideate phase opens in just 1 week, so mark your calendars. And there's just an incredible and robust professional community around you and cheering you on and 100% behind you on this journey. So on behalf of the Teachers Guild, really thank you 110 for bringing us all together. And Melissa, Randy, Sonia, and Jennifer, thank you so much for giving us your time today. It was such a privilege to hear your perspectives, to hear about all of the incredible work that you're doing, the initiatives out there. I feel really inspired about all of the opportunities in STEM, and I hope that all of you educators out there listening do as well. So thanks so much for tuning in. Continue the conversation on Twitter. We've got a hashtag going, hashtag mindblowingSTEM at Teachers Guild, and you can also find all of our panelists on Twitter as well. So thanks so much for listening, and we hope you have a wonderful rest of your day or evening.
It was a pleasure.
Thank you.
Bye, guys.
Thank you.